Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting of the Lawrence Alliance for Education to order. My name is John Connolly. I have the honor to serve as the chair of the board for the Lawrence Alliance for Education. At this time, I'd ask everyone to rise so we can recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I just want to note that Mayor Rivera is joining us telephonically for this meeting. At this time, I will accept a motion to adopt the minutes of the April 4th meeting.
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion passes. The minutes of the April 4th meeting are adopted. Pursuant to the motion of Mayor Rivera at the prior meeting that we put public comment up front so that we can hear, most importantly, from the community first in all of our meetings. We will now move to public comment. I have 4 individuals signed up. I ask you to forgive me if I mispronounce anyone's names. I apologize in advance, and we'll try to get it right in the future should people testify again. The first person I have is H. Mali.
Good evening. Humayun Mali, 53 Chester Street. Good evening, honorable members. We, the citizens, are proud that our teachers' union have a contract. With the greatest thanks and appreciation to Honorable Mayor Rivera, Honorable Commissioner Raleigh, Honorable Dr. Bergeron, Honorable Frank McLaughlin, our public school moving forward. Upon arrival of our new superintendent, these are the citizen expectations from the new Lawrence Public School superintendent. Support of our teachers and their union. Continue communication about our teachers' need. Number 2, continue progress of the last 6 years turnaround plan. Number 3, empower our parent and community to be an active partner in education of our children. Number 4, daily trip to different Lawrence schools across the city. Number 5, focus on the importance of continued education after graduation from Lawrence Public School. In this exciting coming academic year, we the citizens welcome the new superintendent. We continue work with the new superintendent. Lawrence Teachers Union must know 80,000 citizens are behind them. We support them. They are most important reason for success of Lawrence Public School. Let's move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Sebastian Brown.
Sebastian Brown, 18 Yale Street in Lawrence. Just wanted to talk about how, I don't know all of you personally, but I know a bunch of you, and I know that you are committed to having this process be as transparent and as community-based and inclusive as possible, and I think it really comes down to the decisions individually you're making along the way, because even if that's the hope or the kind of goal or aspiration, it's about, I think, really those like small seeming decisions, and so I just wanted to offer suggestions for 2 specific decisions that I think you could go down the route of inclusion and including the community, and as opposed to exclusion. 2 specific ones are, I think, 1, it's really important to get on the date, not just commit to the idea, but actually get on the date, a calendar, preferably this year, when you, as a board, would meet with the school committee. It's really important to, preferably in June, before the end of the school year, to meet with the school committee to start talking about the transition plan. For 4 years now, there have been people sitting on that same table who've talked about the importance of a transition plan and getting benchmarks and timeline down. I think everyone agrees we need that, so we just start that conversation But that starts with a joint meeting between school committee and the board. And then number two, I think is really important with the superintendent process. It's really important to have the community be involved throughout that whole process. And they were early on, but it's also really important to have the representatives of the community who were elected be involved in that process from the beginning to the end. And I fear that the subcommittee that's been chosen is, unfortunately, the subcommittee for choosing superintendent is all three unelected officials. And I just don't think that's a good kind of nod to the community because I fear that it's going to become politicized. I think the process becomes politicized the more it's appointed and the more there's less accountability. But when you bring in people who are elected officials like the school committee to be part of that process, the subcommittee as well, I think the more that we go down this route of appointments, that's an exclusion of the community too. There have been 6 or 7 representatives who are fully qualified as school committee members, including you, Ms. Mariana, who should really be at the table with y'all, both in the transition plan and with the superintendent process. So that second one of making sure throughout the whole process they're involved. And I'd love if y'all could talk about those things or follow-up steps tonight in any way. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to state we adopted the policy of the school committee on public comment last time. I don't think we have the bell system in place yet, though. I will give you a T when you've got about 30 seconds left. Appreciate that. Tom Myers.
Tom Myers, and I reside at 550 Haverhill Street here in the city. And what is the timeline? I'm sorry, the time for a speaker?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay, very good.
Apologize, should have
Okay,
stated that.
I'll be under that. I'm here to voice my concern about our elected school committee being denied an opportunity to participate in a screening process for superintendent candidates. I understand that there are 10 candidates that were presented by the private entity that was doing the initial screening, and it's now to willow it down, I believe, to 3, and that you have not appointed any elected official. And this decision demonstrates a clear and unambiguous lack of respect for our elected and highly educated school committee, and even more so for the citizens who elected them and who they represent and desire to serve. As you are well aware, winning elections legitimizes power in all frames of our nation. In addition, I believe that you must work with our elected school committee to develop a transition plan, which has clearly defined benchmarks and a time frame for when this board of unelected officials, and I exclude Mayor Rivera and Pat, cedes control back to our school committee. The Lawrence Teachers Union also must have their rights reinstated under the collective bargaining law 150E of Mass General Law.
You still have 30 seconds if you'd like.
I hope that you take what I said.
Could you state at the microphone? Thanks.
No, I hope that you seriously will move towards a transition plan. Lawrence has changed radically in the last few years. There are many, many young, highly educated people ready to assume power. We don't need a state colonial board governing us. And I think if you get around the city, you get to know people, you're going to be amazed at how sophisticated the people in the city truly are. I'm really proud to be a resident in the city. I've been a resident for 34 years.
Thank you. Josh Alba.
Going, everybody? I know this doesn't stay up there. Josh Alba, I reside at 198 Prospect Street. Yeah, so I want to third Tom's and Sebastian's message here, in that saying, as a lifelong resident of the city, I'm very concerned, lifelong resident, parent, and activist in the city on education issues and immigration issues and a bunch of other stuff. At the lack of democracy in this city and the amount of decisions that are being made without real, true, honest community input. I've been involved for the last 10 plus years in nonprofits, on boards, advocating for different issues, and it feels like this continuation of 7, 8 years that we're going on this receivership feels like a slap in the face. It's like it's an insult to the people that are trying to open up doors for the Latino immigrants that came to this city, for the previous wave of immigrants that try to open up these doors against the power and consolidation of the higher classes, right? And now we're facing this receivership board that seems to not recognize the racial and disenfranchisement, the historical disenfranchisement that our community has faced, the poverty that stops people from being able to participate fully, that stops people from being engaged and informed properly, that just the lack of access and representation and social justice and racial awareness of what's needed in this community is greatly lacking. And I'm very disappointed to see school committee members not being allowed the democratic rights to represent us, especially the ones that are being more vocal and championing our causes. Very happy to see the ones that are up there for sure. But representation is key, and there's a lot of injustices in our community that need to be rectified and reconciled with. Thank you.
Thank you. Do a last call at this time for anyone who wishes to make public comment and was not on the sign-in list. Thank you. So at this time, I'm going to open it up for any sort of board member remarks on any issues that are not on the agenda tonight. I know I'll start with Dr. Custodia Laura, who has an announcement.
This is can everybody hear me? Okay. So the announcement that I have has to do with the work that we are doing at Northern Essex Community College with the public schools. Last year, we have been working actually for a few years with Lawrence High School to increase the number of students that will have access to college credit while they still finishing their degree at the school. And as part of that, we have been able to get some funding from the state and from time to time offer some free courses to students. Last year, through the collaboration of the state, we were able to offer students different free courses, and through that, we had 7 high school students that graduated from Northern Essex with, on average, 9 credits, which is about half a semester. In the process, we were working with the Smith Family Foundation. We were working again with the Lawrence High School. We were able to receive a significant grant that now will support about 200 Lawrence High School students to get access to college credit. And this year, we're going to be graduating 35 students from Lawrence High School, and each of them will have an average 27 credits, which is almost equivalent of 1 year ahead of college. So this is going to happen on May 22nd from 6:30 to 7:30 at Northern Essex and L. Hefney Building. And we hope that everybody come and celebrate that, because this is an accomplishment not only for the students, but it's also for the families that have been supporting them.
Thank you. Any other announcements or just remarks on any area that's not going to be addressed on the agenda that any board member wishes to make at this time? Okay. I just want to recognize that Superintendent Mary Lou Bergeron has joined us, and we appreciate her being here tonight. She's going to present shortly, but just want to acknowledge her presence, and we very much appreciate it. As far as item 5, report of the chair goes, I just want to pick up one matter today. We had discussed at the last meeting the memorandum of understanding between the state and the Lawrence Alliance for Education. The intent was to distribute a copy to, a review copy to everyone and to solicit comments. We were advised by legal counsel that that would be in violation of the open meeting law. With a case that just came down, very similar, that you cannot proceed in that way. Similar to the decisions made around the number of folks on the hiring subcommittee. And so what I just want to state at this time, just so there is clear understanding both with the public but also with the members of this board, is that when matters come up as they are, want to, that have to be addressed, while the chair is empowered with a certain ability to just take actions in that way, I know that would not be in the spirit of what the members of this board want. And so what I will do is designate a subcommittee of 3. I will always make sure there's at least one Lawrence resident on those subcommittees, work through items in that subcommittee, take whatever actions necessary, and then make sure we present publicly on all those actions. I have not acted on the memorandum to this point, but did take the action of asking Jess Anders to review the memorandum and offer comments. I'll select one additional person. We also instructed legal counsel to do certain research on what these memorandums look like with all the receivership districts. We'll make final decisions from there, and then we'll report back to the board publicly. But I cannot send each member a copy and ask for comments. It's very clear that would be in violation of the open meeting law. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, and I'll do that on any such matter that arises. And then, again, we'll always make sure there's a Lawrence resident on that. Mayor Rivera? Yep.
Yeah, so on that specific matter, are we going to just put it on the agenda, or you're going to just accept the report from the subcommittee that will include clearly Jess, because she's the first one who's got it, of 3? How do we go through the document? Are we going to go through it at the next meeting? Because I think as long as we do it in open session and it's on the agenda, we can all go through it. You just can't do it kind of.
Yep. I do think there's actions and points within it where decisions have to be made before it gets to the board. And in that case, I'll have the subcommittee. But yes, basically in sort of dictating what research we wanted, what positions were of interest to us that we felt like we needed more information or whatever that case was. We did that all through the subcommittee, but yep, we can bring whatever that product looks like to the meeting, let people review it at the meeting and receive further comments that way.
That works.
Great. Okay, with that said, I'm going to move on to item 6, and we're going to begin with the report of the hiring subcommittee, and then we're going to follow with the hiring subcommittee for community interview.
John, I just have a quick question.
Yes.
Do we have a date when receivership is going to pass?
Sorry, receivership has
It's
transferred, but the
transferred,
memorandum
okay.
has not been finalized.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So what I want to just do as I work toward, I think, the most important information, I just want to outline a little bit on the process thus far. When the Lawrence Alliance for Education was formed, the state, in a desire to make sure that Lawrence would not fall behind on typical superintendent hiring timelines, engaged through public bid the firm HYA to serve as the professional search firm for the Lawrence Public Schools superintendent search. That search firm presented to us, took our feedback, and told us what they wanted in initial steps to develop a superintendent profile. Members of this committee then worked with LPS and folks who have what I would say was a very thorough community process. I would readily acknowledge it was rushed given the timeline, but I think with a lot of great and hard work done by folks here and at LPS and out in the community, there was a great community process that got a lot of feedback from all corners and stakeholders in the Lawrence community. This allowed the search firm to develop a superintendent profile of what, based on community feedback, the Lawrence community was looking for in the next superintendent. I want to state very clearly that the document that was developed there and all of that community feedback informed every step of the process that the hiring subcommittee has taken over the past few weeks, that document and all of that community feedback, which in the report was itemized right down to each individual remark from community members. That served as a guiding document. I also want to say that document is available, Ventura, on what website?
We have it posted on the DESI website.
Okay.
I believe it's on the district.
Okay, so it's on the DESI website and the district website, and I just want to say that we took also the steps to translate the executive summary into Spanish and engaged a local business owner to do the translation. I think it's a great document, and I think people should take a look at it, and I think it still has a large role to play in where we go with the process. So from that point, the report was generated, given back to this committee in open public meeting. Comments were given, revisions were made, and then that document was finalized, distributed nationally to try and help seek the right candidates. At the same time, there was always an open job description and link relative to the search. At that time, at our last meeting, I appointed a hiring subcommittee made up of myself, Julio Severio, and Ventura Rodriguez. And again, to be clear, the reason why it was a 3-person subcommittee and not a 7-person whole committee was to enable the confidentiality of applicants who do not want to have their identities revealed when they are applying, so that it has no impact on their current employment and job status. It needs to be a 3-person subcommittee. If it was a 7-member committee, it would put us in violation of the open meeting law, though I do readily understand how that would have benefited the process overall. But that said, I think the members of the committee kept in careful mind what we had learned in the community feedback, what we had heard from fellow members of the board, and what we knew to be the general case in the Lawrence community about what priorities were for qualities in the next superintendent. So with that said, the hiring subcommittee began the work that would lead to the meeting tonight. There were approximately 40 applications received for Lawrence Public School Superintendent. They were applications received from around the country. Certainly a number based in Massachusetts, but to be clear, there were a number of candidates from around the country. Working with the search firm, the hiring subcommittee reviewed all of those applications. Certain applicants, approximately half, were then given a preliminary screening interview by the search firm, who would report back on that. And the hope there was to just make sure that we were hearing from neutral voices relative to specific applicants that had been viewed as being the fit that aligned with what the community had identified as the priorities. From that point, a slate for interview was developed. The search firm made recommendations. Each individual subcommittee member made recommendations. The subcommittee convened, talked through all of these applicants, asked questions of the search firm based on what was their understanding, and reviewed all of the applications in depth. And ultimately arrived at 9 candidates who would be invited to participate in a confidential interview. The invitations were extended, and I should point out at that time, we also asked the search firm to go back and screen 3 candidates who had not received preliminary screening, but on second review of the applications thought merited additional screening and the potential to then be invited in for confidential interview. Ultimately, in each of those cases, the decision was then made after that preliminary screen that they would not be invited for a confidential interview, and we proceeded with the 9 that had been set by the hiring subcommittee. And ultimately there, 8 of the 9 accepted the invitation. So 8 candidates were interviewed on a confidential basis on May 3rd, May 7th, and May 8th. I want to make clear that these interviews were not conducted solely by the hiring subcommittee. We invited an English language learning expert to take part in each interview. We invited a special needs expert to participate in each interview. And we invited someone with expertise in working with districts both on the inside and the outside. And when I say that, I want to just be clear, I'm not talking about outside operators. I'm talking about folks who work in partnership with schools every day on things like helping to support arts, support enrichment, very much in the enrichment mold. And we invited someone with expertise in working with districts on that to participate in each interview. All of these experts had to sign confidentiality agreements to honor the confidentiality of these clients. They were given no other instructions other than that we'd ask them to ask the questions they thought would be most appropriate and then debrief with the hiring subcommittee as to what their feelings were on applicants given their expertise in their various areas. The decision to do that arose specifically from the community feedback relative particularly to the importance of serving our students with special needs and our English language learning students. And all of these experts had deep background on these issues. So interviews began for these 8 candidates. What I can say publicly, again, recognizing that we have all had to sign confidentiality agreements to protect the confidentiality of these applicants who live and work in other communities and districts where they would not necessarily want this to be public knowledge. But every candidate was asked questions on their feelings around open architecture and autonomy, how they would view the current structure in Lawrence relative to autonomies and school site, strong school site management, and how they felt about open architecture, how they would critique it in addition to whether or not they felt it was the right way to do it or the wrong, how they would critique it, what were the strengths, what were the weaknesses, what were the things they would want to know, learn, and potentially change. All of the candidates were questioned around instructional strategy and their general approach on instruction. That often fell under discussions around autonomies at the school-based level, which also focused on budgeting at the school level, curriculum at the school level, hiring at the school level, and all of the various pieces around open architecture, but there was extensive questions on that. There were extensive questions on general vision, approach and prioritization of strategies for English language learners. And our experts were invaluable in helping to really delineate where each candidate fell on English language learning and the needs, running the K-12 continuum, recognizing the differences between a newcomer and a new arrival at age 16 and at age 3, recognizing the differences for those who have interrupted learning, recognizing the differences for ELLs who have been in and out of schooling, but here for a long time, yet not been able to, for whatever reason, have their needs met. Exhaustive, in-depth questioning around strategies for English language learners. This questioning was then equaled by exhaustive, in-depth questioning around how the needs of our students with special needs would be met, beginning very specifically with questions around a commitment to inclusion, where that fell for each candidate, how they would assess that, how they would view the work this year with the autism strand in Lawrence Public Schools and the movement toward inclusion for which the district has put in and the teachers have put in immense time and preparation to make sure that that was done right, and how would that be viewed, continued, and potentially expanded by the next superintendent. But additional questions relative to transition services and where that fit in and how you would do this, and always questions relative to how do you do this in limited budgetary circumstances, and among other questions on the general attitude and view towards students with special needs, always questions relative to school discipline and restorative justice, and where that fit in the superintendent's, potential superintendent's conception for all students, but most particularly as well, as we know, students with special needs and students of color who are sadly, historically, and through this day, disproportionately punished in our schools. This line of question took place in every interview. There was in every interview questions on the candidate's commitment, vision, and general approach and strategy on family engagement, recognizing the good work that has been done in Lawrence, and I think what the family engagement folks here would say, who've put hours and hours and hours in, the work that still needs to be done, and where would that fit in, and how did candidates view that, and what was their conception on that, and there was extensive questioning around vision on family engagement. There was then detailed questioning on cultural competency, and as I have been often asked, what does that mean? I would readily say that I am perhaps not the right person to offer that answer, but I will say I've done a lot of work around cultural competency. I've worked on my cultural competency for years. I view it as a huge priority, and I would say just as a base conception, and not as a whole definition, but as a base conception, it is true efforts to understand the lives of the children who go into your schools every day, and the lives that they lead, both in context of race and culture, but also in context of family and community, and recognize that cultural competency functions on multiple levels at all times. A very complex issue. Again, I would not call that a satisfactory or whole definition, but this is what we were driving at in interviews. We asked every candidate about their experience working with unions. I should take a moment to recognize that we've been joined by Lawrence Teachers Union President Frank McLaughlin, and we appreciate him being here. Each candidate was questioned on their experience working with unions. The partnership between the LTU and the district over the past 6 years was cited. And it was referenced that it didn't mean both sides always agreed with each other, but that it was viewed and felt to be a largely healthy working relationship. Would the candidates work to maintain that? What was their experience working with unions? How did they view unions? And did they recognize that the unions in the Lawrence Public Schools were essential and absolute stakeholders in the schools? Finally, there were, and I think I referenced this, that it weaves through all questions, detailed questions on budget management, past experience with budgets. In particular, we would like to understand dealing in budget crises and similar situations. Those were areas that were dealt with in every interview. I will say in addition to that, that there were always particular questions based on the particular candidates. There were also questions relative to any issues or flags that we thought we should know about, that they would want us to know about, given that if they advanced to the finals, it would be an incredibly public process. We asked them to disclose any such issues so that we could take those under advisement. Again, very particular questions for each candidate depending on who they were as well. And we'd also ask them to and we would open with sharing who they were. That covers this great depth of each interview, but I want to close on this summation with one very clear point. Every interview, the question was asked, why are you applying to be superintendent of the Lawrence Public Schools? Why Lawrence? And what do you know about Lawrence, and how do you view the community of Lawrence? And I can just say that Ms. Silverio would not have allowed those interviews to get 2 minutes in without those questions being asked, as it should be. And we appreciated having that strong Lawrence voice in each interview. When interviews were finished, we would debrief with the experts in the room. We would ask questions of the experts because they would ask very nuanced questions, oftentimes on instructional strategies relative to English language learning and SPED in particular. We would solicit comments from all of the experts relative to their opinions. We would offer our opinions. We would move to the next interview. At the end of the 3 days, we asked informally of the experts those who they felt would be worthy of a final interview. We then asked the outside experts to leave, and we thanked them for their service, and we went in to the subcommittee session, reviewed each of the 8 candidates, talked through each of the 8 candidates, and ultimately agreed that we should, and I should state this, recognizing that we required a unanimous vote to advance a candidate to the finals. We agreed that 3 of the 8 were clearly worthy of invitation to the finals. And we had debates, hard debates on other candidates, but ultimately we're in clear agreement that 3 of the 8 merited invitation to the finals. So with that said, I will say that I am sad to report that one of those 3 who was very excited about the job and the chance to come before the community opted to withdraw and not proceed to the finals. I cannot reveal this person's identity because they withdrew prior to and did not consent to being publicly revealed, but we were very encouraged by this candidate and sad that they ultimately chose to withdraw. So what was an incredibly time-intensive and I think heartfelt, thoughtful, and detailed process over the past few weeks and really intensively over the past 5 days, with days that did not end till very late, we are very happy to present 2 finalists. We wish it were the 3, but we are very happy and satisfied that among these 2 finalists will be a great superintendent for the Lawrence Public Schools, someone who wants to serve in Lawrence, cares deeply about Lawrence, and views this opportunity as an opportunity that would be great for them because they know it is a great community. We believe that they will be dedicated to helping the district go above and beyond its already good work, but expand on its commitment to English language learners, be committed to inclusive learning across the Lawrence Public Schools for our students with special needs, highly values cultural competency, views family engagement as an absolute essential that has to happen at all schools and be part of the very DNA of all the other pieces that schools are doing, recognizes the need to work with unions to get good work done, and knows and understands that tough decisions will need to be made in a tough budget climate, but that work has to be done collaboratively. I will also say I think that these candidates recognize they can't do it alone. They need to build a good team. They need to have the support of the Lawrence community. And I think each would say they look forward to coming here next week because they know that the job does not start with offering their vision, but rather asking for yours. And I believe that these 2 candidates will reflect those qualities. So those candidates are Cynthia Paris, Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Education in the Newton Public Schools, and a former principal in the Boston Public Schools, among many other credentials. I should mention Ms. Paris is also Puerto Rican, grew up in Puerto Rico and came to this country, was always in this country and a U.S. citizen, but would describe it as an immigrant experience, as she did to us, and came to Leominster, Massachusetts as, I believe, a 9-year-old, moved back and forth, and did not come as an English speaker, and is bilingual. The second candidate is Verna Ruffin, the current Chief Academic Officer for the Tennessee Achievement District, which would be loosely equivalent to a turnaround district in Massachusetts, though it is not a geographic district, but rather a collection of low-performing schools that have been clustered into one district, where she serves as Chief Academic Officer. Ms. Ruffin also has past experience as a superintendent and assistant superintendent prior to taking on her current role. Ms. Ruffin is African American and can speak passionately not just to how she feels about her approach on education generally today, but also passionately to her struggle, struggle she very clearly and rightly views as a civil rights struggle to ensure that all children have access to a great education. Those are the 2 candidates that the hiring subcommittee has advanced. May 15th will be a day for a community interview, which that subcommittee will report on. Next, May 16th will be a day for the LAE board to interview the 2 candidates. We are excited as a hiring subcommittee to present these names to the board, and we are excited for these 2 candidates to come to Lawrence. I would entertain questions from board members on any aspects of this process, but again, just want to be clear that we cannot discuss specific names of anyone other than Ms. Paris and Ms. Ruffin. Any questions?
Mr. Chair?
Mayor Rivera?
Yeah, can you talk again a little bit about the diversity of the applicant pool? I'm not sure that I got all of that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have done that.
And the diversity of
Yep.
what the, I just want to make
Yep,
sure we
no,
know.
let me be very clear on that. So, when we moved from the 40 applicant pool and then the preliminary screening to the 9 applicants that we invited for a confidential interview, of those 9 applicants, just want to be clear, one piece of the screen on those applicants was that they had to have experience either working in urban education or turnaround specifically. They also had to have experience working with English language learners, and we had to see a demonstrated experience to some degree on prioritizing inclusion for students with special needs. That was one threshold that we were looking for with the pool as we moved towards 9. The other aspect of it was that we were very clear and very specific that applicants who were bilingual would be looked at very closely, and that we were very actively seeking bilingual applicants who could meet all of this criteria, but that was one criteria as well that was given priority. And I should mention that Ms. Ruffin does not speak Spanish, but she is bilingual and can speak, I think, she speaks French, English, and a Creole. So, and she can speak passionately, I think, to English language learners and the concerns of English language learners, and can speak not just passionately, but thoughtfully and strategically on that. But within those 9 that were invited for final interview, 5 of the 9 were bilingual Spanish speakers. 8 of the 9 were candidates of color. In the final 3 that were received invitations, 2 of the 3 were bilingual Spanish speakers. 3 of the 3 were women of color, and 3 of the 3 were bilingual or multilingual. And again, this goes with turnaround experience, experience with English language learners, experience in urban districts, experience and commitment to students with special needs, and what I would say would be generally a commitment to cultural competency among all who work with children and families. And as well, a question I drove hard on, a commitment to family engagement. So that was the overall pool invited for finalist interviews, then ultimately the 3, and now 2. I think it was a very thorough process, heartfelt process, and a process in which the needs that the community specified as the priorities were always at the forefront. I just want to say, given the public comment, which I take as very, very valid, and comments that I've also received from the elected school committee prior to tonight, that I understand concerns about a hiring subcommittee and what would happen in that screening process without elected officials present. Say we had a very strong Lawrence voice present. People can disagree respectfully, and I appreciate that. I didn't want elected officials in that room, not because I don't think they have great expertise, not because I don't think their opinions are important. I wanted neutral observers who could give us feedback based on what they were seeing that we could then interpret to what the community had told us and whether or not it fit. But I would readily say that the elected school committee and the members of it have the skill set and the desire, and more than anything, the passion for Lawrence and the know-how to have benefited that process. But at a certain point, I just had to make a decision that We had the 3 hiring subcommittee members. We had a strong Lawrence voice. We needed expertise in subject areas on instruction relative to ELL, on SPED. We had parent perspective on those as well when it came to SPED in our expert. And that we wanted to make sure that we could do that thoroughly and factor in the community in a neutral context. That was my decision in doing that. But that said, what I've said to the elected school committee, who raised several good points, the chair has raised several good points to me in the days since and right up through today. What I have said is that I'm going to make the outside experts available for her and any member of the school committee to talk to, so that they can understand the process from their point of view and verify the questions that were asked and the context. And I would note within that for those outside experts, I had prior relationships with half. Each one of them, I think, would vouch that I'd never, ever tried to influence their opinions on anything relative to this. I asked them to be there because I knew their opinions would be top-notch. But the other half I never met. I made sure to verify their credentials, but I specifically wanted as many independent voices as possible in that process. And I'm more than happy to make those outside experts, as long as they will consent, available to the elected school committee to ask questions to ensure the integrity of the process. And I think that is the absolute right of the elected school committee to request that. I have no disagreement with the request, and I'm more than happy to accommodate that. Second piece, we won't take it up tonight, but I am in dialogue with the elected school committee right now to have some kind of joint agreement put in place where we can have joint meetings as this new superintendent comes in to place. I want to make it clear, I value this elected school committee. I would no matter what, but I also do it because I know every member of this board does. These are Lawrence residents with deep connections to this system, including being parents, and they care about Lawrence, and their voice should be heard. So, we will make those efforts, and I just make those statements both because of the importance of what we've done relative to picking these superintendent candidates and because these issues have been rightfully raised tonight in public comment. Okay, with that said, I'll give last opportunity for any questions from board members on the superintendent search. Okay, I will turn it over to the chair of the hiring subcommittee on the public interview process. And I'm going to readily confess that because I have been so submerged and immersed in the superintendent search end on the other committee, I don't remember who the chair of that subcommittee is. Ventura, would you give us a report, please?
Absolutely. So thank you. And so just as a recap, at our last board meeting, the LAE asked myself, Jess, and Pat to meet as a subcommittee to come up with a process for the finalist selection day. And when we met, which we did last week, one of the first things we did is review what we understood the charge to be, which was to create an inclusive, well-publicized process for superintendent finalist selection days that were open, responsive to different Lawrence stakeholders. It was just, really front and center in terms of the charge that we heard from the board. And so we met and discussed, things like what a finalist selection day should include, what some core components should include. And they included things like visits to different schools in Lawrence, making sure that candidates can see all types of schools in Lawrence, because we do have a really rich diversity of not only grade levels, but schools with different types of foci. We also felt, we knew that there would be an interview with the LAE, but we also felt like there should be dedicated time set aside for every single candidate to meet and be interviewed by different stakeholders, and that included students, teachers, staff, parents, the elected school committee, and in a broader community forum as well. And we then talked around a lot about ideas about how to ensure that, similar to the feedback sessions for the superintendent sort of quality process that we went through, wanted to make sure that all of those sessions were widely advertised, included things like childcare, food, translation services, just really trying to build on, the good feedback that we received from community members in terms of feedback from the session. So we wanted to keep that front and center as well. As well as we talked about ways to make sure that after every stakeholder interview, we have a way as a board to collect feedback, probably in the form of surveys, that we as board members can sit with and read. And I'm envisioning stacks and stacks of paper, that we get, so that we can read the feedback from different stakeholders as we're thinking about and before the final vote. So we also discussed, possible locations, possible schools to visit, and as I said, ways to advertise it. So roughly the schedule we came up with was that it would be a 2-day process for all finalists. And when we met last week, we had no idea how many finalists there would be. So we built it, assuming that there could be a range in terms of the final number. We, though, discussed the possibility of the first day, which we looked at as Tuesday, May 15th, that most of that morning and early afternoon would be visits to schools, and that we would, again, prioritize visiting different schools with different grade levels, different parts of the city, making sure that candidates have a good chance to, get a good taste of Lawrence, but also for Lawrence, schools to really shine through. As part of the morning, in addition to visiting schools, we would make sure that the candidates have a time to meet with students, and that would be a student focus group at the high school. And then that the afternoon would be a block of time that's held for the school committee for the elected school committee to be able to meet with the candidates individually. And we envision that being a 30, 45-minute meeting with each candidate that the school committee is able to meet with. We would then have a meeting likely from 4 to 5 with educators, where they would be invited to come, and again, one candidate at a time, be able to speak to and receive questions. And then that evening, the community forum would be held. That would be then followed up the second day, the 16th, with individual meetings with the LAE. We didn't know how many candidates there would be, so we had contingencies of, if it was a very long day, there could be tours of other schools built in to that second day, so candidates have that opportunity. But now that we know that there'd be 2 finalists, we would go back and rework the schedule so that, the candidates fit within the block of time for the interviews, and then we could finalize the schedule for Tuesday. Should also point out that Denise Snyder from the district was at our meeting, and in addition to being really, really helpful with the feedback for the leadership profile, she and her team have been, ready and able to assist us every step of the way. And so part of the work that would happen after, the board meets tonight, and if we agree on this general outline, is I would turn to Denise likely, in a few minutes after this meeting's done, and we would, her and her team are ready to then put together a schedule that I know we could react to very quickly. So I would please, I'd say to my colleagues on the subcommittee, please add anything I may have misrepresented or failed to mention.
Thank you, Ventura. You really captured everything we discussed. What's important to note, and I think we need to say publicly, that we all felt that it was very, very important that there was time built in for the school committee there, taking into account what was said today. And we do recognize the fact that the school committee must have that opportunity to interview the candidates and to give feedback to this board. So I want to make sure that that's publicly said.
Honestly, the final thing I'll say is, and I'm one of the members of this board who is new to Lawrence, but if you need a pick-me-up on a Friday, I'd go to the senior center. That's where we held our meeting. And you walk in and hear, like, there was merengue playing because there was a class going on. And I mean, I just got to say, I don't know, just as a sidebar, that was a pretty fun place to be with my esteemed colleagues on a Friday morning. So, and just thank you to them for opening up their doors and really hospitable to us on Friday.
Any other questions or comments to Ventura or anyone on this aspect?
John, I just think we do need to pay some attention. We didn't really have time to get into the details of how we were going to outreach. We talked a little bit about the group of students that would come to a focus group with the candidates, and we're going to rely heavily on the high school to help us with that. But in terms of just making sure that educators, that every teacher in the system knows about that meeting and can make some time to come to that meeting, and then making sure we do some wide publicity around the community forum. I think we need to follow some of the outreach protocol that we had outlined for our meetings in general in order to make sure that we have good attendance at the community forum. And then I would also call on the elected school committee and the some of the folks who spoke in the school participation, in the public participation part, to get the word out so that a lot of folks can come to that community forum and meet the candidates.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, Jess, for the reminder. Because one of the benefits we had was of having the sessions, community sessions, to get feedback on the superintendent, and so we did talk about making sure that we're tapping into the ways we advertise for those, which seemed to be successful, and then also we had the contact sheets from all of those sessions. And I will say for those sessions, part of what made it really, I think, successful is partnering with so many community groups and community leaders who use their own networks to get the word out. So I think, just to repeat what Jess said probably better, more eloquently, is I think we want to really tap into those networks again, because just as with the other sessions, we're not giving folks tons and tons of time. So we need to be really, really aggressive on tapping into all of those networks to get the word out. So we'll rely on the district, but we'll also rely on those community partners and leaders to help us.
And we need snacks and childcare at the community forum.
We need snacks and childcare at the community forum. Yes, okay. Absolutely. It's family engagement 101, right?
Probably the teachers could use some snacks.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, last call for any comments on this. I'll just say I wanted to very methodically lay out everything that we've done, and that's what I was focused on in my presentation. I'm also pretty tired because we've been working on this a lot, but on just a personal note, I am excited for the community to meet these two candidates. And I thank Superintendent Bergeron and her team for how helpful they have been working with placeholder dates and placeholder names and all of that on getting the logistics ready. And we thank you and your team for everything that you've done and how flexible you've been in that. And we are really excited for these two candidates to come before the community in this great process that the members of this subcommittee have helped done so much work to design. So I'm excited about it. And I thank everyone for all their good work.
Mr. Conley?
Yep.
If I may, I'm sorry.
Yep.
I just want to express my gratitude to you for all of the hard work you did in trying to accommodate all of the stakeholders for these interviews these past few days. And I know that it has taken many, many hours and a lot of work on your part. So from my part, and I'm sure from Ventura's as well, we just want to say thank you for the work that you did on behalf, getting us in order to get all of the interviews in a timely fashion and getting the information to the public. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. I appreciate those comments. I appreciate that. I have a Jeff Riley-like reaction on compliments. They make me very nervous. I appreciate them, though.
Her compliments are always heartfelt, John.
Yeah, thanks. I'm always worried there's like a trap that follows the compliments, but that's
I'm
just,
sure she'll want something from you at
that's-
some point.
Yeah,
but-
that's my Irish upbringing, though. Okay. So on that optimistic note, let's move to the budget. We asked Dr. Bergeron to come brief us on the budget process, and Christine Bufagna, the school, I want to make sure I get it right, school chief financial officer?
Yes.
Thank you. To brief us, I just want to mention, just as a precursor, we sort of picked this budget up at a strange time for this board because receivership has just transferred, but at the same time, the city charter dictates that the budget be over there by the 1st, and the prior receiver had authorized this budget. So I hope members will ask questions in all of this piece, but I think that we have to look at the coming of the new superintendent and starting the next budget cycle and really take up as soon as possible how we want a budget process to happen. I don't know that we can make that a reality, though, for this budget cycle, when we inherit it at a point when they're already on the city charter, it has to be before the city council. But I did request, though, that given that sort of odd timing, that the school department come brief us on the budget, and I thank them for coming tonight. I'll turn it over to Superintendent Bergeron.
No problem. Thank you for having us, and I'm going to apologize to Pat because she's heard this now multiple times, as has the mayor. So, but for the rest of you, we wanted to give you kind of an update on how we get to our figures, where the money comes from, and what the final figure was that we submitted. So Christine's going to start and walk you through the process.
Good evening. So we figured we would start with how the general fund budget is determined. Every year, the state determines what is an adequate minimum level of spending for all public school students in every municipality. This includes students that attend the local districts and charter schools. This is known as the foundation budget. The amount of spending is determined by a state formula that varies based on students' needs. The foundation budget calculates how much a district should spend on costs, such as teacher salaries, benefits, supplies, curriculum, special education, etc. The foundation budget cannot include the costs for adult ed and transportation and school building capital needs. Those costs are paid from the city through other revenue sources.
So can I just ask a question about that? Does that method of allocation then trickle down within the system itself so that the lump sum amount that comes to the city from the state is then allocated to the various schools based on school population? Oh,
Yes.
as that is the sole deciding factor, basically?
You'll find there are
Say this.
Okay.
pieces how that happens.
All right, great, thanks.
So it's called Chapter 70 aid, and it's determined in 3 basic steps. A district's Chapter 70 aid is determined by the 3 basic steps. It defines and calculates a foundation budget, which is an adequate funding level for each district, given the specific grades, programs, demographic characteristics of its students. So every student is looked at in Lawrence. It then determines an adequate local contribution, how much of that foundation budget should be paid for by each city or town through the property tax, based on the relative wealth of that community. The remainder is funded by Chapter 70 state aid. So you can see at the bottom there, it's a formula. Local contribution plus state aid equals the district's net school spending level, which we refer to as the NSS requirement. This is the minimum amount that a district must spend to comply with the state law. 2 factors.
Is the city in compliance with that? Like, has the city made its minimum contribution every year?
Yes.
Recent, yes.
Yes. In recent years, the city has met the minimum level of net school spending. 2 factors determine our foundation budget revenue. Number 1 is enrollment. In enrollment as of October 1st of the prior year. The state uses enrollment counts as of October 1st to determine the funding level for the next year's budget. So for instance, you can see the trends, and we're using fiscal 18 numbers, so it's 13,857.
So that was October 1 of 2017, which then generates your 19 budget.
Right. The second factor is the foundation budget per pupil rates. The state multiplies the October 1 enrollment counts by a per pupil rate for different student characteristics and adjusts for an inflation factor. So it takes that enrollment number and then it multiplies it by this per pupil enrollment number. Now, for Lawrence, what this translates to is our net school spending requirements. The city of Lawrence will receive $186.6 million in Chapter 70 in fiscal 2019. This makes up 94.8% of the overall net school spending requirement. Lawrence receives the highest percentage of Chapter 70 funding in the Commonwealth. The city's minimum contribution to net school spending is $10,120,196 for next year. So for Lawrence, what this means is we receive our budget from two sources. The City of Lawrence, which is recommended by the mayor and approved by City Council. This budget is often referred to as our budget appropriation. And then we also have state and federal grants. Lawrence receives grants either through a formula based on our population, referred to as our entitlement grants, or on a competitive basis. Most federal grants are passed through the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. The grant time periods can vary, however, and are usually not aligned with our fiscal year, but we still provide our grant information in our budget, so you can see all funds that build our budget.
So we do an all-funds budget, so you know what we have in terms of our grant funding, and many of our grants are funding a lot of the bodies in our schools. So, but the budget that goes to the mayor for a request is only what we're asking for in terms of the appropriation under Chapter 70 and the required net school spending. So that figure that goes to him is really the net school spending figure, okay? So.
And when
Yep.
you're talking about state and federal grants here, you're talking about aside from the Chapter 70
Yes.
money? Okay.
Yeah, we have about $20 million worth of grants that would be in addition to the figure that we put forward as our overall net school spending figure.
Okay, but what the mayor and city council see is the Chapter 70 money and their contribution
Yes.
and the expenses tagged to that.
But the whole budget book, you'll see all of our funds are accounted for, but what goes to them is just what they are going to appropriate to the district.
Gotcha.
Okay? So our budget process starts back in late December, early January, so you're barely into school and you're starting next year's budget. But we start by uploading all of our current staffing into our financial preparation system, my budget file, so we have the current staff, and we can project up what staff steps would be and money and allocations for staffing for next year. And then we present a budget process to the principals at the principals meeting, usually in late January, beginning of February, so that they have all of the documents they're going to need to fill out. What are their staffing currently, because they have autonomy to make adjustments within their buildings based on the feedback from the teacher leadership team and their PTO, et cetera, in terms of what are the goals and priorities for their school. After we get that, we calculate, because around that same time is when the state's releasing the governor's first round budget. So we have a baseline figure about what are we going to be getting, so we know kind of where we're at in terms of what we see our needs are going to be and what money we know we should be anticipating. And then we do individual meetings with every school and every department to have them go through step by step, who are your staff, what changes are you thinking about, where are you allocating your other resources, what are the goals you've decided on as a group, and they present all of that along with their individual school operational plan that has been vetted by their teacher leadership team, so that that all comes in together along with their calendar, so it's one big discussion about where are they going and why have they made these decisions based on what data. After we meet with them, we pull all of that data together, which helps us create our budget and to develop the district's goals. So we have that 4 pillars we're going to work on no matter what, but based on what each school is saying are their priorities, it helps the district then to decide what are the overarching priorities we will be supporting, because it's the majority of schools that are going to need support around those. So this year it's around social and emotional learning. It's around inclusion, it's around supporting EL students, and it's around continuing high-quality enrichment and rigorous instruction. So those are the big priority areas that all schools have, in one shape or another, put as part of their goals for the upcoming school year. The finance team then pulls all of that data together to build our budget book, and we presented it to the receiver at the time, and he blessed the figure, which we had already identified by mid-March in terms of where we were going to go and what we were going to be needing. It went to presentation of public hearing, and then finally went to delivered to the mayor actually on May 1st. It was delivered to him as required by city charter. So in terms of how do we fund our schools, as you know, we have school-based autonomy. So that means schools have earned levels of autonomy based on their performance, how well they have done in terms of assessments and making progress for building stronger leadership teams, their parent engagement, and their success rates with students. So they have the ability to look at their funds and make adjustments on where they want their funding to go. So sometimes they'll say, I need another body because I need to have more specialized services or greater intervention for this population of students. So I'm going to look at, maybe I don't need this position, I'm going to convert it into this position. And they can do that as long as they can't displace staff. They can't just say, I don't want this person, so I'm going to change that position. They have to own their staff. But if they have money they're going to get because of accruals, somebody's going to retire, it's a high-end salary, the new person's going to make a little less, they can play with that additional money and make decisions around what they want. They make decisions around what academic programs they're going to maintain, what assessment systems they're going to maintain, what kind of enrichment providers they're looking for, and what kind of money they're putting towards all of those things that help design their budgets. So in staffing, they automatically get what their current staffing rate is. They get those staff with whatever steps or increases they would be entitled to based on contracts, and that starts as their foundation for staff. So we've already looked at all of the increases for benefits, et cetera, by the time they see their staffing. For their non-salary budgets this year, because we are looking to at least have level service budget, everything in their non-salary was leveled from last year because we knew that there was a gap that we were going to have, but they could still change anything within those areas to what they needed.
Just a quick question. I mean, do you have a rough sense of how much of the overall budgets on average for each school is staffing versus non-staffing?
It's about 83%.
Overall, our budget is 83%.
Yeah, okay. So it roughly mirrors
A lot
that
of
in the
people.
schools as well, yeah.
Mary Lou, do individual schools have autonomy to apply for philanthropic funding, or all of that is rooted through central office and the district?
We have one grants management office, so they have to bring it through to us because we have to look and see what commitments some of that might mean for the district
Okay.
before they can apply. So yeah, they can go and search it, but they have to bring it down so that we can look at it, because sometimes there are little commitments or things that we may not be able to make as a district because it's only going to be one school that wants these funds, and they may want district plans for different things. So we
Okay.
review it with them and then make decisions with them about moving forward.
Okay.
So what do we do in our individual meetings? Like we said, we go through all the staffing, we do all of these things. We make sure that they have their leadership team approve everything. So we have a sign-off that has to come in with their operational plan and all of their goals that say the teacher leadership team is verifying that they have been involved in and participated in the design of these products, so that we have their teacher voice being heard in terms of what they're doing within their school. And we also have them solicit information from their PTO in terms of, are these goals the right goals for our school? Are we moving in the direction that we want as a school community?
Can I just ask a couple of questions about that? So how does the solicitation of input from the PTOs happen? Is there like a central standardized process around that?
Every
Or-
school has their own structure for their PTO and when their PTOs meet. So some
Yep.
have monthly meetings, some have two, one evening, one morning. So each one structures it based on what their PTO leadership feels is the right structure for their school. But everybody has to bring their budget through at some time between that February and March timeframe when they're submitting their final documents.
Okay.
Um,
And
I just
then,
want to jump in for one quick second. We noticed this meeting is ending at 7:30. We're at 7:30. Just to be in compliance with open meeting law, I'd like to entertain a motion to extend our time to 8 o'clock, and if we need to extend again, we will. Could I have a second?
second.
Motion seconded, or rather, could I get a motion
I'll make the motion.
moved? Thank you. Could I have a second? Second, all those in favor? Motion passes. Jess, sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. So then the other question I had is just going back to those 4 pillars. Is that based on the priorities of the turnaround plan? And
Yes.
so that's just something that stays the same, that will remain the 4 pillars
Those are our 4 pillars.
until some revision of the turnaround plan or update of the turnaround plan
And they're
is made.
kind of standard pillars, so they're not like anything that is drastically different than a lot of the goals and alignment fits in.
Yep.
You know, it's high-quality instruction, it's enrichment, it's family engagement, it's critical thinking. I was losing track of that one.
Yep.
Critical thinking, which are the 21st century skills.
Yep.
So all of the schools' goals, which will all be published shortly out on the website for their plans and their goals and their calendars, are just being finalized and edited, so,
Okay.
okay? So then we move on to how do we get our figure? So we know that the state has said Lawrence must spend $194,712,670 on public education. The city has the ability to charge certain of their services against net school spending. Those services are calculated for things like payroll running, procurement processes, DPW services that are given to the school that aren't capital projects. All of those services that we access through the city can be charged back under net school spending. They are reported on our end-of-the-year report from last year, and those are the figures that carry into this year's budget. So for the city, they had qualifying expenses, including the tuition that gets allocated for charter and choice, comes right off the figure. So there were $23.5 million in qualifying cost, which then brings down to what could be available to the school committee or school budget, $171,209,871. But because 3 things are not actually funded under Chapter 70 money, the city has added them back in because we actually manage those services. So they add in the cost for the city for transportation, which is $9.2 million, for adult ed at $1.2 million, and for the one lease that we have remaining that's over 3 years old, that almost $200,000 gets added back into what would be coming to the school department. So it adds up to $181,829,021. Go ahead.
And I'm sorry, and that funding is separate from the city's required contribution?
This includes the required contribution. So it was 184 in Chapter 70 and 10 million in city allocation.
Okay, so,
But the transportation, adult ed, and building are city expenses. They are not net school spending eligible.
I see, okay.
Okay? So a lot of people usually want to know, well, how do they get to that charter and choice money? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I do have a question, and this goes back to the school autonomy. And, usually the budget get approved, but sometime around November, we get 90 cuts. And, from the state, how does that affect the school budget? Sorry, and then, does the school still have the autonomy, or is that something that is then decided at the level of the superintendent?
Well, what will happen is if we get cuts, then we go back to every school and say, okay, this is the cut that we're taking overall as a district. We divide it by what would be your portion of that, and they have to make those.
A representative percentage of?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And right now, our budget is actually built on the House Ways and Means final version. So we're waiting still, we don't have the Senate Ways and Means yet, but we have to submit to the mayor prior to that actually happening, and sometimes that's July or later, So a lot of people have asked how that charter choice figure comes about. So Right now, we have 50 students who are out on school choice, means they're going to another school, public school, by choice because they have open seats. That figure's way down. It used to be somewhere around 120, so we're down to about 50 students, and most of them are high school students that have been out for a while and are finishing up where they went. In terms of charter students, we have 1,670 students who are attending charter schools, not all attending them in Lawrence. Some of them are attending, we have them in Lowell, we have them in Boston, we have them in a variety of places that they're attending charter school. And then, so they take that and the state tells us how much is going to go towards charter school tuitions and school choice tuitions. That comes out on the cherry sheet from the Department of Revenue. They also tell you what is their special education assessment to offset some of those costs that would be required for students attending because of their special needs. So when you total that all up, it's $26 million that's going towards charter and choice, but they also get a reimbursement from the state for offsetting charter tuition. So they reimburse the city a portion. So they take the amount that would have been charged, less what they get reimbursed, that comes out to that $21.4 million for charter.
That's a good question. So I know there's been always a difference between the reimbursement formula and what actually is being reimbursed. So is this number actual or?
That is what the DOR has put out as their most recent figure of what the reimbursement would be, because we have a couple of schools that have added new seats, so they're still at the 100% reimbursement, and they haven't dropped down yet.
Okay, but your estimation, you'll actually get this 4.5 million as opposed to?
That's
okay.
according to
All
the
right.
Department of Revenue, that's what
cherry
they're
sheet.
telling us.
Okay, yep.
Yeah. Okay, so once we take those things out, we went and said, all right, this is our required net school spending, these are the additional city costs. But we know that the bare minimum net school spending will not allow us to have a level service budget. And that really is our goal. It is the desire of our families that we maintain everything that we currently have in place because of the progress that's being made. So we've heard clearly at our President's Council, at PTO meetings, from community forums, at the superintendent forums, that they want to maintain everything that's available for our students currently. So in order to make that happen, we have put in a request that asks for about 1.3% above net school spending. So the budget that went in as the receiver's budget went in for $184,112,253. And that is what we have submitted as our request to the mayor. We are in discussions with how that budget will be funded, and there are ongoing discussions with the city about that gap of a couple of $1 million and how that might come to be.
Okay.
But we felt it was the desire of all of our stakeholders that we make that request. So when we look at the budget, what we are saying is going to be funded in this budget, if funded as whole, is all existing staff, all existing programs, and the last iteration of the last grade level for the Abbott Lawrence Academy, because this will be the first year they will actually have 12th grade. It will provide continued funding for our district priorities around our rigorous instruction, career and college readiness, as we heard from Northern Essex, that how things are going and expanding, as we do also with Merrimack College. Our inclusive practices, we're going into our third year of our roadmap for inclusive practice, and really a lot of work with the schools are looking for around social emotional learning and trauma-informed schools. It does level fund school instructional operational materials, and it allows for all of our cost escalations like health insurance going up, our city retirement costs going up, and an increase in sped tuitions, which is set by rate setting in terms of those increases, and a slight increase in our transportation contracts because of the third year of our transportation contract. So all of that would be funded in the budget that we have put forward at this point in time. So that's kind of the quick overview of could I budget. I think you have the budget book. I believe we sent it to everyone, so you have a copy of it.
So another question. The capital process, I mean, I
Capital
think
improvement.
there's sort of some general agreement that all of our schools are busting at the seams and we don't have enough. And I I also think there's some debate around the fact that there's some schools of thought that would move us toward larger, more centralized school, less but larger and more modernized and centralized school complexes versus more and smaller but perhaps more accessible neighborhood schools. How does all of that, where does that get talked about? How does that get planned for and decided? How do we think about what facilities we can improve or add to?
The capital project actually is carried by the mayor's office. They have a whole capital improvement plan for 5 years. Our projects are added to the capital improvement plan, as well as the projects that are moving forward to MSBA, which are required to go through the city and get approval from the city because they would have to bond for the projects that are going forward. Currently, there is one that is moving pretty quickly through the pipeline. We're about ready to put out our RFS for project manager for the Oliver School. And then we have a proposal in for the Leahy School to be remodeled. We are looking to maintain neighborhood schools, so that is the goal, because we are a neighborhood school, and most of our families live within a walking distance of most of our schools. And the goal is to be able to bring and build a school that will allow for the full continuum of grade levels, so kids are not having to move, I go to kindergarten here, I'm going to 1 to 5 here, then I'm going to 6 to 8 here before I actually hit the high school.
Right.
So the goal is to try and build them in a way that would allow for that continuum and allow for a continuum of services, so our special ed students don't have to go to different schools because they have the program. But every school would be able to have that programming available within their neighborhood school.
Right.
That will take a while. We know that our first school that might go and get built will be about 2021 before they're going to be ready to build. And the second one would be about 2023 if that actually moves forward. So there is a time that we're going to remain somewhat congested, and we've looked at staffing and how do we make that happen. There aren't a lot of buildings out there that we can say are available that we could easily move into for school sites. We're using one currently while the Rollins is being repaired. So we're looking at all of that because we know when we do build, you have to put those students somewhere during the construction process.
Right.
So all of that is discussions we've been having, and the mayor has been very actively involved in our capital projects and making sure a lot of our projects like roofs and HVAC systems and things like that are being looked at and taken care of.
And so, like, where does that conversation take place, and who from LPS participates in it? And is there like a subcommittee of personnel? Is it something that happens regularly? Is it just a subset of the budget planning process, or
No, the
how
budget
does that
plan, the
unfold?
facilities manager actually maintains all of our listing of what needs to be done in our buildings that would be capital projects.
Yep.
Because under net school spending, we can't pay for anything that's more than $150,000 of any kind for work to
Okay.
be done in a building.
Yep.
So all of that, we've given our input into the city's budget, so in capital improvement project plan. So Chris Molino was involved in that. Anne Marie Stronach, as our COO, was involved in that, along with the DPW director, the mayor's office, the budget and finance director from the city. That's the team that works along with the other departments because they have things that are going on that same capital project. And they're prioritized by life safety first, and then moving on to what they are going to do over the 5-year period.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Pat?
I just want to add to the discussion. Dr. Bergeron was present at a city council meeting when we're talking about schools that are overcrowded, and she cautioned the city councilors when they're approving housing, the zoning board approving housing, to take into consideration that a lot of the new housing is being built in the central part of the city where we do have a crunch, a building crunch with kids, with the students. And she just reminded the city to be cautious as far as, okaying projects that would impact the schools. Because we do, things aren't going to be back online until 2023.
2023.
So that's important to note.
I actually just want to comment on that because this has been an ongoing conversation between myself and Superintendent Bergeron. I actually did, just so as the board knows, my organization is a developer of some of that housing, and we did some analysis of the applicant pool and tenant pool for our housing units, and more than 95% of the people who are applying for and then living in our housing are coming from a previous Lawrence address. So even though some of those folks, some of the families there may be newly enrolling children in the school system, the families are not new to Lawrence, and those are families and students that would be entering the school system in any case, no matter where in the city they live. So I think this is actually an issue that I think it would be really fruitful for this board to take up in a future meeting, because I think that there's a common underlying factor, which is population growth in the city, that's driving both housing demand and school enrollment. And it's not necessarily, or even probably, the development of the housing that's drawing people into the city. People are coming anyway, and we have a lot of planning to do around both increasing the housing stock and increasing our school capacity so we can adequately educate people, which is why I was asking some of those questions about the capital budget and how we do that, because I do think we need more schools. So
We agree, and I'm going to be clear that I was asked to go to city council about that topic, and I clearly said, I understand the need for housing.
yeah,
But we have to say where we're at and our needs, and we're overcrowded. So-
absolutely.
Ventura?
I just want to say, I'll have a chance to dig into the budget book, so there may be more specific questions, but just want to thank you. I've worked with several districts in this state, and I thought this very brief but very informative presentation was just really helpful for laying out, like, basics of can be a complicated formula for funding in our state. So I don't know, I just really want to commend you and thank you for laying it out, and just very accessible, so thanks.
Great. And if you have questions, once you do go into the budget, we're not going anywhere,
Yeah,
so
great.
we'll be happy to come back.
Yeah, thank you. This was really helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We actually covered item 8 during the report of the chair, and at the request of Mayor Rivera, we will bring the MOU before this body to review it in an actual open meeting at the next meeting. I do just want to say, though, pursuant to the manner in which I had said I'm going to proceed, where we'll have Lawrence resident member of a subcommittee, I am going to continue to negotiate a few basic pieces of that. I don't think anyone would find material, but for the sake that we probably should sign this soon, since we are now the receiver, and have a clear understanding with the state on delineation of powers. And I will, at that time, when we next meet, present to you any changes that were put into the agreement, why that was thought. But again, it won't be executed at that point. At the request of Mayor Rivera, we'll review it as a whole board in open public meeting. Any additional items anybody wishes to bring up at this time? Great. I just want to thank the board members for all of their flexibility because of the superintendent search, with schedules moving quick and not necessarily typical advance notice. I want to thank everybody from LPS who's been here tonight for all of your helpful information, everything you've been doing to help facilitate LAE. And I will just close with the two most important dates right now on the horizon. May 15th, when the two superintendent finalists will come before the community in a day-long process. Yep.
Are you sure? Because we're doing this again. Is it the 15th and 16th, or the 16th and 17th?
15th and 16th. Yeah, 15th and 16th.
Okay.
I polled you on 16th and 17th.
Right, and then we switched it back. Okay, thank you. Just totally clarifying.
No, I have definitely set a precedent where that question should be asked with my doodle polling ability. But it will be May 15th for the Community Day, when the candidates come before the community with this day-long process, which I think will be great. And it will be May 16th between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m., which we will further refine those details, but between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m., that the candidates will come before this board for public interview. May 15th, Community Day. May 16th, LAE board interview. Both candidates will do May 15th in a staggered schedule, but they'll both do their Community Day that day. Both candidates will come before LAE board, also in a staggered schedule, May 15th, May 16th, and those are the next two big dates. With that said, we are, Pat, yep.
John, do we have any idea when we're going to meet after the interviews?
Yep, so it's
for a vote.
tentatively for the week of May 21st. I'll just say that within that, I don't know when on the week of May 21st. I think the first place you have to start when candidates are done with their LAE board interviews on May 16th. The next possible time we could convene to take up a nomination and vote would have to be 48 hours later, assuming we noticed that meeting that day. I'm going to guess that that may not be the case, and that is why in all the scheduling stuff I've put out, I've said week of May 21st, but I'm not going to specify a date yet on that, but it should be week of May 21st, and I will just leave it there.
Okay.
Any other questions on any of that? Okay, great. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.